So before getting started, I'm going to talk about, there's an interactive piece to this, and with your phone you can go to ATN, which stands for arenatechnight.nicetransition.com, and if you connect to that right now, there's going to be some polling during this during this presentation that we'll see live results for some questions. So go to that URL, things will update on there, and you just select your choices and hit submit whenever you want to. And when we get to the first one, I'll remind you about it. So I'm here to talk about contextual design, and I guess to get started, do a quick introduction to myself. And I like to say that I get excited and I make things. I do UX, front-end development, hybrid applications. I've been doing front-end technology since '95, so worked in a lot of different fields and also different integrations, but primarily focused on just front-end technologies. And I currently work at Cardinal Solutions, and I'm also a co-founder and co-organizer of the Columbus Web Group with Adam Weiss. And we have our next meetup, so we meet up once a month, and our next one's this Thursday. And we're doing a event called Interaction and Animation Design for iOS, and that's actually located here. So if you're not a member of Columbus Web Group, if you go to that URL right now, there's actually a link out to the Columbus Web Group. So now that you kind of know me, I'm going to go and do the first kind of poll and interactive piece to know a little bit more about you guys, and if I need to go more techie, more design, or otherwise, I'm going to use this kind of as a caliber for that. So what is your profession? If you go to that URL, which is atn.nicetransition.com, and answer what best suits you, and then hit submit, we should be able to see some results on the board. Give that a moment. All right, cool. So that seems to be working, and it seems like we have a lot of developers in the room, a few designers, and others. From the others, just a quick shout out. What does other mean to someone?
Infrastructure.
Okay.
Business analysis.
Awesome. Any others?
Development manager.
Cool. Cool. All right, so getting into the outline and the topics that I'm going to be covering. There's going to be 6 main parts to this presentation, and first we're just going to start with websites in general, talk about the digital landscape, we're going to talk about users in general, and then we're going to get into responsive web design, and then talk about your users, and then we'll get to contextual design and really how these number 1 through 5 relate back to contextual design. So looking at this, what is a website? And it seems like a kind of a silly question, but it's very hard to define. You ask different people, like, what is a website? And everyone has a different meaning of, I think a website's this, I think that. To the point that if you even Wikipedia, like, what's a website? It's the world's longest definition, and it sounds like the most complex thing for something that we interact with and use every single day. So just taking a step back and looking at what a website is and how I define it, I define a website into really 3 points, and the first point is content. So content is king, and I really believe that's true, and it's kind of a silly saying, but we say that and then we forget about it, because then we start driving into the other 2 pieces, which are UI and UX. And UI means user interface, so it's the look and feel of your website, and UX is user experience, and that can be interactions and how you actually deal with your customers inside of it. So this is my definition of a website. It's very bare bones, but throughout this presentation I'm going to be referencing back to websites as content, UI, UX with the bold content. So where do websites live? Another pretty simple question, but looking at the overall digital landscape these days, there's a lot of questions of, like, where does a website live? This is one of my favorite graphics out there, and it's actually from Luke Rabuski from lukew.com, and it really summarizes everything in the digital landscape. So it shows on the top row smartphones to desktop, and it has these inches from less than 3 inches to 27. So it's first covering the whole scale of width of devices out there. The second row here, it says palm, lap, and desk. You may have trouble seeing it in the back, but it says palm, lap, and desk. So based off those screen sizes, where are users actually interacting with these devices? The next row, and I think this is one of the most brilliant pieces of this graphic, is it calls out touch and gestures. And right here, a lot of people think of mobile just having these touch gestures or tablets just having them. But you can see that this graphic actually starts with gestures on the far right of this, and it covers everything from the smallest size. So that's a really big call out of this graphic, and I think it's one of my favorite pieces of this, and it's going to come up a couple times in this. Another one is the cursor and keyboard. We also forget that some of our mobile devices actually have cursors and keyboards to them. But I'll be referencing this, and when I say digital landscape, I'm talking about the whole digital landscape. I also like to bring up in this slide, or when mentioning this graphic, I'm trying to avoid saying mobile, tablet, desktop, and whenever I'm talking about an experience, I'm talking about the overall digital landscape. So each piece of the project is not necessarily just straight mobile. One piece may be more mobile targeted, one may be more desktop, but overall it's the digital landscape. So diving into another kind of silly question about websites, it's who are they for? And a lot of times when we're in this industry and we're building out websites, if we don't have in mind who we're building these for, we can be driven the wrong way and not create the experiences that we really need to be creating. So just a big red call out that they're for users. And that should be a no-duh, but it's a constant reminder of everything that you're doing when it deals with website design, website development, website strategy, or planning. It's actually for users and wherever they may be across the digital landscape. So I'm going to give a reminder here, and this is kind of a really easy question, but how many of you have a cell phone? You can go to ATN, again, nicetransition.com. Ooh. So, all right, so there's five. I don't know if the 5% are just joking, considering that they probably voted with their phone. But when we talk about website development and UX design these days, a primary focus has been on the mobile landscape. As you can see, this should probably be 100%, but this quote really, this fact is really, really amazing. This is from October 2013, and it says there's 6.8 mobile subscriptions out there out of the 7.1 billion population. So that's a crazy amount of mobile subscribers. And the numbers just kind of get crazier. So as of January 2014, 90% of Americans have a cell phone. 42% of American adults have a tablet. So going here, how many people have a tablet? And I think that this is absolutely crazy, 42%. I expect that number to be a lot higher here, because you're at Arena Tech Night, but 67% of cell phone users find themselves sleeping with, checking their phone without even hearing a notification. I know I'm definitely guilty of this. I'm always looking at my phone. It's like if I haven't checked my phone the past 5 minutes, I'm going to be pulling it out of my pocket. Being up here, not having my phone in my hands, kind of making me feel awkward, but 67%. 44% of users find themselves that they sleep with their phone next to their bed because they don't want to miss anything that happens. 29% of cell phone users describe themselves as they couldn't live without their cell phone. I'm guilty definitely of all of these, and when I don't have my cell phone, I feel naked. I feel like my life is incomplete. That's probably just my personal problem, but I think at least 29% of people can relate to that. So with all that, I guess you could say we're a bunch of weirdos, but I think overall we can say that we love this stuff and we really, really want to be connected and we want to have consistent experiences. And as users, we have a lot of demands. So how can we start making these experiences? So one of the ways that you can start making these consistent experiences is using responsive web design. So the question on here is, have you worked on a responsive web project? Interesting. Cool. So with that, what is RWD, or responsive web design? And I'm going to touch on some like the basics of what responsive web is for those that aren't really that familiar with it. So responsive web design was coined by Ethan Marcoux in May 2010, so it's relatively new. But there's been a lot of advancements in responsive web over these past short couple of years. And it was from an Alyssa Part article too. So a definition that I like to really summarize responsive web is crafting sites to provide optimal viewing experiences across a wide range of devices. And I sometimes substitute that wide range of devices to the digital landscape. But it's crafting sites to provide optimal viewing experiences across that digital landscape. Some people like to define it as, they make hand gestures, or they just think of it as a squishy page, or they're moving one piece to another piece. This is a quote from Adam Weiss over there from the Columbus Web Group. And down here it says the source is a conversation we had, so it's true. But I'm constantly in meetings, even with people that have worked on responsive web projects, and I still see this hand gesture of, it's when the browser gets smaller and we move something over here, and I really, really don't like that. I think just looking at optimizing and making the web accessible is a better way of looking at it. So, looking at some of the basics of responsive web design. The first piece is the meta tag. And this lives in the header of an HTML document. And there's two real main parts of it. So there's this name, and you declare it as equal to viewport. And you have a content attribute. And there's some additional options that you can have here. And this is the most common one, where you say width is equal to device width. So when you put this in the header and the page renders, it scales the content to be your device width. So that's kind of step one. Here are some additional options down here. And if someone's really smart or wants to, call me out, there is actually another one, but I intentionally leave it out. It's user scalable. And user scalable equal to no disables the pinch zoom on a device or an experience. And for someone like myself that's obsessed with accessibility and making experiences for anyone out there, disabling that pinch or that scale just does not make your website accessibility compatible. So the other options here are initial scale, and you can see here I have initial scale 1. That just means it's 1-for-1 aspect ratio from the actual project that loads or content. Maximum scale, in combination, you can play with those to get some other ones, but basically if you have it set up how this is, that's step one. The other one, app media, and this one can get kind of tricky at first, and the app media lives in your CSS. And there's two main parts of it. There's types and features. So the type is highlighted here in blue, and this is an example of screen. It's a very common one. And the second one is feature, and it's separated by an and, so you have a type and a feature, and they're always in parentheses. You get multiple features if you want, but this is a pretty common setup. I'm also going to call out that I'm using ems here instead of pixels. So ems, best way to describe it is if you're in your browser and you're hitting up, up, up on your font, you're making your font size bigger, the website actually scales as if you were shrinking your browser or making it squishy. So based off accessibility and increasing font size, you still have a really consistent experience and it doesn't break. So ems are a recommended best practice for developing for responsive design. I could probably do a whole topic just on ems, but that's my quick summary. So looking at media types, which is the first part of the media queries, you can see that there's a large list of them. There's actually 10 different types that you can have. The most common one is screen. The second most, and it's probably where a lot of developers or teams started using media queries, is the print. And print, I don't know if anyone else remembers this, but when the app media in 2010 came out, everyone wanted their websites to be printed really, really nice. And that was really the first step into responsive that I remember getting into. And we actually used it when I was at MI Homes for printing off brochures for our clients. So we actually used our database to generate brochures, and using that the App Media print, create some really nice style guides. So, but in most cases when you're doing for the web, you can have screen. I personally actually leave it off for the most part, and I just do App Media and then my types. I'm sorry, you can actually leave out the feature and just do the types. So in the case, you can have App Media and then just have the feature inside there. So here are all the features, and there's actually 13 of them. And you could talk about all those all day long, but the most common one is width. So moving forward on here, you can see feature and the types there. And again, this lives in your CSS, and the approach that you have here is you're not overwriting properties, but you're extending CSS properties so it can fit across that whole digital landscape. So with this, a lot of focus on the media query has been always on screen size. So in my opinion, I feel like there's a lot more to responsive web than just the screen size itself. Back chart here. And this is a quote, again, from Luke Robuski. And it says, responsive web relying too much on screen size. And Luke Robuski from lukew.com is definitely a leader in front-end technologies and UX design. And I think this is a really, really big problem when we're talking about responsive web and talking about interfaces, because it makes us focus on just one aspect of all those many things that I kind of quickly showed here on the screen. And this is kind of a big part of my presentation about contextual design, is looking outside of the just width of the device and looking at the user and those experiences that they may have. So I like to say that website design for today is more than just fluid grids, flexible media, and media queries. And mobile users will do everything that desktop users will do. And as you look at across like that whole digital landscape, there are certain callouts that you will have when looking at maybe an Android user versus an iOS user. And you want to make those experiences as seamless for a user from when they're going from one device to another device. And if they're used to a swipe gesture on their iPhone, and then all of a sudden it becomes some click event and going from website to website, they're going to be confused. And not having these consistent usability considerations from website to website, you're going to break experiences, you're going to confuse users. And I know one of the things that I hate the most is when I go to a website and I feel like I have to learn the navigation, even if it's a website that I've gone to many, many times. And every time I go there, I'm like, how do I even just get to the search, or how do I dive down to a product page? So just keeping in considerations of the user and different platforms is kind of a start of where responsive starts tweaking into contextual design. But there's a lot more, and I'm going to be covering those in just a few moments. But where we really start is looking at users, and it's the most important piece of probably this whole discussion. And you can do that by first collecting data, and you can do this from your analytics, from metrics, from focus groups, from user studies, and trying to get as much as you can to learn about your users and other users that may be out there. So looking at your own user base is a start, but looking at competitors or other people out there can definitely influence your data that you're collecting. And then once you have that data collected, interpreting it, and then after you've interpreted it, consolidate it to a point where you don't have this massive amount of data, because what you really need to start doing is you're not going to be able to target every single user and every single experience out there. You want to start looking at the masses of your users. So looking at your users, really the next step that I like to say is create stories. So once you have that data, you've consolidated it, and you've targeted your users in the masses, you create stories, you start storyboarding, and get as many people involved internally, externally, to start making experiences that are going to be approaching your customer. And really how you do that is when you're developing and designing every piece of a web experience, you create it in a modular approach. And by modular, I really mean that each piece of your experience are just components that are coming together to create one overall experience. So they're like puzzle pieces that at the end will create an overall result. There's different methods of doing that. In like the CSS world, it's object-oriented CSS, all the different MVC frameworks that are out there, just design patterns, or even naming conventions like BEM. Being able to create the solution that you can take one piece, remove it out, and test it for different cases, or have fallbacks for different users, or experiences that are based around the user themselves. And a quote that I really like is from Ben Callahan from Sparkbox, and it's modularity is a requirement of maintainable systems. And I think as you dive into contextual design, this is a really big piece, and it's probably just as important of knowing who your customers are, how to consolidate that data and really interpret it, and then putting them together. So if you're not doing this, it's just going to be like you won't know where to divide up those pieces and bring them all together. So a really good question to ask as you're doing all this is, how will these pieces adapt? Really, what are the variables? What are individual components? What will happen as a user enters this module or this overall experience? And these experiences are going to be different for different users, but to the user, it should seem completely seamless because you're basing it around factors that they're used to. So what I like to call this is contextual experience design. So contextual experience design is not really a term that I came up with. It's been around for a long time, contextual design, and I'm just kind of relating it to the web and especially responsive web design. So there's another question on that URL. Cool. And the short definition that I like to give contextual experience design is it's not just about the device, it's the context and the device. So as we talked about responsive web and users, looking at the device as just one piece, but it's really more about that context. And the experience is focused on the user's device, and a crazy amount of factors that can go into it. But hopefully you're narrowing those down as you're going through your data. So it's 35%, cool. So looking at two main pieces of contextual design, which is users and users device, there are 6 pieces that I'm going to be calling out, and there are a lot more. It's just really due to time. I'm just calling out the most important ones right here. So first one is demographics. And an example of this that I would like to say is like when I go to J.Crew and I buy a lot of things from J.Crew, it knows from previous examples that I'm a male buyer. It's been in my account that I'm a guy. So when I go there, it's first showing me men's clothes, which is a very easy step in. So it's about the age, gender, locale, your hometown maybe, and many other factors. But think of like J.Crew, and I go there, and it shows you the appropriate clothes. Next one is social. And an example of this would be if, say I was looking for a TV, and there's millions of options out there with a TV, and sometimes you're like, is it the price that's worth it, or is it this? Well, what maybe is most important is someone that you know and respect. So for example, say Adam bought a TV from Best Buy, and I can filter based off of what my friends have purchased from Best Buy and see their reviews. And I don't even have to ask Adam. I can ask him like, well, do you actually like that TV as a whole? But I can start filtering results based off of people that I know, based around my social graph. And with social, there's also other aspects of like the entertainment and the interactive pieces. So bringing people back into your experience and creating something that's unique to me around different contexts. So other people may not know Adam, so they're not going to see that Adam really matters to their decision making. Location is probably one of the most popular and most used, and this has been one of the first ones when it gets into personalization and contextual factors around the web. And going back to another MI example, when we had a home page that had this huge zone when you got there, and it showed homes from your area. And if you don't know anything about the home industry, homes are very different in Florida versus Texas versus Columbus, Ohio versus Virginia. So we are a nationwide home builder. We are in 15 different regions around the states. So when users in Florida went to our website, they saw homes that were Florida type homes. When you were in Texas, you saw it. So the idea is the reason why we did that was users in Florida and Texas were complaining that we didn't build Florida-style homes or Texas-style homes. So that was actually something that we did in response to our customers and to provide an experience that they were expecting to see when they got there. This is very easy to do. There's different methods of detecting location, one of which is opting in by geolocation, but you can also get it from IP and server settings too. Next one, which is also very common, is date and time. Very easy example of this is the lunch versus breakfast. So I go to some quick service restaurant website, and when I go there in the morning, I want to see the breakfast menu. When I go there during lunch, I want to see the lunch menu, or I want to see the dinner menu and what changes if there is a difference. So it's just filtering that content for the reason why I went there. Because I know I'm not going to remember the deep link page, but I'll remember Wendy's.com when I go there. And this is something that's very, very easy to implement into any experience, and just having different factors based around it. Next one is a pretty broad title, but it stands for the loyalty factor, so how much I have engaged with the brand. So it's if I've come back many, many times, maybe I have an enhanced experience, or maybe I'm even testing with that they're loyal to me, so I can switch out content, maybe even try some things out before it goes out to the masses. You can also do some A/B testing related to this, but it's providing an experience that's more unique to someone that is loyal with the brand. And this is probably actually my favorite out of all these call-ups, is the virtual to physical. And this is where you start moving outside the device and connecting it to physical items inside the world. An example of this would be mobile payment. So I have my device, and my device becomes my tool. I go through a line at a restaurant, and instead of pulling out my wallet, I have my phone already in my hand because I'm checking it every 10 seconds. And they can scan it, or I can give them some kind of code and make that payment really easily. And we just went from virtual to physical. There's other things that are probably a little bit easier to integrate, like driving location. So bringing a user from the virtual world to the physical world. There's a bunch of new technology coming out with low energy Bluetooth that actually allows the device to communicate with physical objects inside of a room from a very short distance, which is really, really amazing. And I think as that technology develops, we're going to see that more and more in physical shopping experiences out there.
That doesn't mean mannequins will be talking to us.
That would be very creepy. So, so moving away from user and looking at device, and I want to call out that, as I was talking about mobile, I like to say mobile is a user state, not a device, and that's another quote, and I use quotes all the time because someone's probably said it a lot better than me. And this, when we talk about the device here, it's always important to add user's device in front of everything, and separating that device as that's all I'm targeting. So in the context of the device, it's really just the user here. So there's a handful that I've also selected here. There's 6 additional pieces. RWD, conditional fallbacks, progressive enhancements, bandwidth, input, and attentive user interfaces. So first one is kind of echoing back to the responsive web design piece, but I relist this and bring this up because I think it's important to say like there's responsive web and there's contextual design, and responsive web kind of lives both and above and in contextual design. So I see it as it's just the way that we make websites today. And when you're talking about responsive web, it's more of a discussion on best practices, techniques, and standards. And users are already expecting this because it's really that first step of when we're talking about creating these accessible experiences for users across the landscape, is making it first squishy and moving it around, as Adam Weiss likes to say. And with responsive, and we talked about the mobile web and the mobile proliferation of devices out there. There's really a lot to learn about mobile devices, but more importantly, there's a lot to unlearn about like the desktop experiences. So as we look at building experiences, there's more and more mobile interactions today, and there's so much to learn, and the community is definitely growing, and it's out there, and there's so much research that you can collect on your customers and just the world that's happening out there. And from the desktop, it's like we've kind of moved away from that, and there was so much background on that, and this is still relatively new. So a lot to focus on with just mobile and the full digital landscape. With the device, the user's device, the conditional fallback comes into play, and these can be looking at hardware that's specific to a user as a whole. And another example would be, say my phone has geolocation, so that's something that I have to opt in per experience. As a user, I say I don't want Target.com to know where I am right now, so I hit cancel or quit. And the experience shouldn't rely just on knowing my geolocation. There should be a fallback experience for every piece of technology advancement that you have out there. And another example to really make that clearer is the Facebook or social integration. So I don't want to give my Facebook ID or authentication to an experience, so I opt out. Well, the whole experience shouldn't fall apart, and that's one of the most one of the most common breaks in the whole system is people are relying on everyone to be a Facebook user, and when someone opts out, then it all falls apart. So just thinking for everything that you do, there's something to fall back on, and there's a default experience that you can always go to. And if the experience is limited, say a user does decide to specifically opt out because they didn't want location, you should give them the ability to then opt back in. Because I've also seen that in a lot of experiences where at that time I had very poor connection, so I didn't need to download all these things, or I wanted to see a lower res version of it. But then the next time I go there, it's remained at that same low, poor experience, and it's like I now have to clear my local storage and clear my cache just to get back to where I wanted. Progressive enhancement is really focusing on more of the browser for that user's device, and it was coined by Stephen Champion around 2003, and his main idea here was that the focus is on the content, and that's why that's why we have them. So really focusing on content, and then getting into the overall presentation, how that's going to be shared, and then looking at enhancements there. So targeting the lowest common denominator that may be like your IE9, and then building up from there. So your experience is going to work no matter what browser they may be. And as a web developer, it's kind of painful that we still have to support these older legacy browsers, but we know from different businesses and corporations they lock down what version of browser you can have. So it's not always going to be the latest and greatest. So everything that you're building should be targeting lower and then building upon whatever that lowest point may be. It's really about being future friendly and not necessarily being future focused. And the difference between those two is, if I'm future focused only, I'm building for the latest version of Chrome that came out last night. But if I'm future friendly, I'm bringing in some of those pieces into my overall experience and enhancing it. So bandwidth is definitely a very big issue when dealing with responsive or users' experiences. And a lot of people make the same connection that we do with size and different touch events with bandwidth. They think if I get a smaller screen, that means I need to lower the amount of content that needs to come out. But there's actually a lot of times where my 4G connection is a lot quicker than my Wi-Fi connection. And especially if you've ever worked at a Starbucks at 11:45 a.m. during the lunch hour, it's one of the worst connections that you'll ever have. So consideration of bandwidth, not on the device itself or user agent that may be related to it, but looking at how those individual pieces or modules can change based around the different limitations that a user may have. So it takes into account just the user's connectivity inside there. And the number one goal with it is access. So first, can users access my data or my content? And what's that bare minimum amount of content that needs to load? And then can they interact with it? And then looking at performance. And then once you can detect that a user has a good connection, how much of it can be enhanced or be built upon? And there's a really good call out that, even though size and mobile considerations it's not just size, but mobile does need to have a consideration, because as of right now, there are bandwidth limitations for mobile devices. So you may only get X amount of downloads, megabytes, gigabytes a month. So even though you can detect bandwidth and they may have a good connection, you don't want a user to download a 250-page website every single time they go there, or download 250 megabytes every 5 minutes. And I've definitely seen that. There was a website that was out there that listed all the highest downloading websites, and majority of them were actually responsive sites. I think one was up to 600 megabytes for an individual download. And something for iOS to call out is there's a 7-second timeout. So if your content doesn't load in 7 seconds, it actually stops and gives you one of those white screens that's like page failed to load. So it's almost impossible for your connection to download that much data in that short of a time. So it's just being conscious of the user and that bandwidth, and then building upon it. There's different methods of doing this, and I'm hoping to see more and more with bandwidth detection. So there's some things that are built in some of the modern browsers and mobile browsers, like checking their connection with whether they're on Wi-Fi or not on Wi-Fi. There's also, you can ping an image and see how long that downloads and kind of calculate based off that how much bandwidth that user actually has. There's a lot more coming out of this, and Google has a couple projects about bandwidth and connectivity that hopefully can be rolled out and actually built into the browser. And some of the specs coming out there have alternative context-based experiences that you can have. One of them is the image that's coming out. So it's not going to be in its initial release, but responsive images, there's actually going to be a bandwidth detection where you can show a lower image for users with bad connection. So my favorite one of looking at the user's device is definitely input, and this one has had so much growth over the past couple of years. So there have been a crazy amount of assumptions on input and screen size, one of which I've brought up a couple times was swipe. But that should never really happen, but we let it happen. And I'm guilty of doing that in a lot of my experiences out there, being like, oh, it got small, and now we can swipe. But that doesn't mean that it's actually capable, because there's Android phones that are very tiny but don't have swipe capabilities. And you can actually detect whether or not a device is touch, which allows for swipe or not, That one's pretty easy, and that's the most talked about. There are a lot of other ones. So there's hover and pointer events, which hover events don't exist in the touch world, but they exist on a pointer world. But then what about those devices that both have touch and pointer and hover events, like the Surface, like all these new computers that are coming out? And some of them actually have multi-point, so you can have up to 10 points and your mouse and your cursor also working at the same time. There was a Google Lab video talking about Google Maps and how in their future version they need to actually have both of those all working. And it also works with the keyboard, so if for some odd reason you have an extra hand and you want to use your keyboard and your mouse and your hands, it's supposed to work, which I doubt we'll probably all be working on projects like that, but if you ever do, those are considerations that you need to have. Voice is getting bigger and bigger, and we're seeing this with more and more devices, and especially like the screenless experiences, like the Google Glass. They're all driven by commands, and it all relates back to accessibility. So every call to action that you have out there can't just be like click forward or an arrow or some kind of graphic for it. It needs to have an event that's tied to it, so a user knows to move forward. Or a touch with a swipe shouldn't just be a swipe. It should also be able to be clicked back and forth. A crazy awesome one are gestures that are coming into experiences, which again will rely on accessibility. And these are going slowly trickling in. The biggest one the one that I'm really, really excited about is called the Ring. And you put it on your finger, and you can connect it to your iPhone, your tablet, your desktop, and actually control all your devices based off your finger. And it works with a touch device, but it's gesture-based, which just kind of blows my mind. A crazy related one is the D-pad remotes or traditional remote controls. So I don't know how many people ever browse the internet on their TV, but keeping that into consideration, how a user with just up, down, left, right can get through your experience. And camera is a little bit far out there, but there are certain experiences that actually rely on it. And again, that would be related to gesture. So input's really big. A lot of discovery that's been happening about this, and it's one of the, I guess, biggest misuses when we're talking about experiences. And you really, really want to optimize these experiences for those different inputs that are available. One that's a little bit more future focused, but is definitely growing out there, is attentive user interfaces. And the best example that I have of this is using Facebook. So out of the people in this room that use Facebook, they probably have heard this but didn't even realize it. So if you have Facebook open in a tab and you're working in Excel, you'll hear a little ping when you get a notification or you get a message. Every time I hear that, I stop what I'm doing, go over to Facebook, and I'm like, someone liked my photo or something like that. But it worked, like, for me. And there are more and more of these capabilities that are coming out there, and some of them are out there today. Sound's definitely out there. Vibrate's trickling into some of the devices out there. And there's actually a spec out there for push notifications from the web. So and a push notification is the same as when you get a notification from a native app like Facebook and it says, Scott Curtis liked your photo. So you'll be able to start getting those in the future. So designing around those and thinking about these in these experiences. I want to give credit to Eric McGarry for attentive user interfaces, and this came up in a conversation that we had over a year and a half ago when we were doing a workshop on responsive web design. So looking at just the overall, these are all the pieces that I kind of touched on. I'm going to go back here and ask this question. So out of the people that are familiar with contextual design, and we actually had a decent amount of people respond that they had heard about it, who has actually used one of these on a project? 9 responses, 10, 11. All right, so out of the people that said yes, is anyone willing to share one of those experiences? Come on, There, yeah, that's why I waited to ask that. So there's 10 of you. First, who are the 10? At least like stand up. I'm not going to call you out. 1 out of 10 here. All right. All right. Scott, do you want to share yours? I'm calling you out. What?
Whenever I've managed you doing contextual design in our projects.
Well, that's cheating.
Well, let's see, I work a lot with progressive enhancement because we work with a lot of companies that have to support back to 98 or 9, but we still want to use CSS3 driven things like transitions, etc. And the cool thing about transitions are that if you have them, it can still be registered to the starting and endpoints. So instead of actually getting the animation, they still get the end result, but you can still use that feature.
Very true. Thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome.
Anyone else? Come on.
I'm somewhat using location because I run the Ohio Green Party group and there's a whole bunch of the subgroups.
Uh-huh.
And I'm trying to get people add themselves with Facebook or Google Plus. They'll be automatically put into that group. I'm almost there.
That's awesome. So is that out there right now, or is that coming?
Yeah, it's out there, but it's still, I'm still having some issues with Facebook.
And if you guys that didn't, Nice Transitions, my Twitter handle. I didn't call that out earlier. If you want to share them, please share them with me. I love seeing people's examples and different people's work. So I'm going to do one quick plug here. So I'm going to keep this up here at the end. So again, I mentioned this earlier, Columbus Web Groups this Thursday, and it's here, and it's going to be really, really awesome. We're going to have pizza. So if I didn't get you on the topic, we'll have pizza. So, some maybes. So looking at what is referred to the father of responsive web, because he coined it, is Ethan Marcoux. And this was a recent quote from him this year. And he said, my goal is to make the web accessible and beautiful as possible. And I think that's something in mind as we're talking about websites. It's not necessarily just that screen size, but it's all those other factors that we have out there, and really focusing on content and accessibility, no matter what those factors may be for a user. So I think that's a really, really great quote. So throughout this, I've also had Q&A questions in here. So I think we have about 10 minutes. I have 4 questions. So Aaron asked, is this actually working? I think so. And I think he was referring to that. So we can clear that one. Jeremy. So who's Jeremy? So Jeremy asked, what did you create this, use to create the site? So this is being driven off of Firebase, JavaScript, HTML. And Firebase is absolutely amazing. Firebase and Facebook. Facebook came out with React.js about a month or 2 ago, and these two are combined to create like a light MVC framework. But it's really, really amazing. So huge plug for Firebase. And for the people that helped, this was actually built in 2 days. So the people that worked on this, if they're in here, stand up. Let's see. Yeah, so it was there were 4 people total that worked on it, but not everyone was like really full time. So it was really awesome to see this come together. So someone asked, Bill asked, what is this thing my laptop's on? Who's Bill? Bill's still here. So I use this as a standing desk, and it's easily, you can fold it up, take it wherever you want. So it's very, very helpful for having a standing desk. It's about $50. I bought it on ThinkGeek, but you can get it on Newegg.
Or you can 3D print it.
You could. That would be really, really sweet. The last question is, does responsive design consider ADA? And the reason why I skipped over that, I cannot think what ADA stands for. So who asked that question? Oh, thank you. So yes, because of when you're developing for responsive, if there was another topic, which I can go on a tangent in, and I brought it up a bunch of times, is accessibility. So any website, you're actually supposed to be considering people with a disability and accessibility, making it as optimized for everyone. So contextual design definitely hits on it, and all these experiences you should really be targeting for people with any disability out there. And some of those types out there that I quickly showed earlier are actually for different detection of colors. So if you're colorblind, or if you have lower, you've changed some of your accessibility settings on your machine, you can actually target devices and change the design and color based around them. So there's some cool things that you can do. No need to use this anymore, but are there any other questions? Yes?
Have you got any work on multiple concurrent users?
I mean, this is an example of it. This people interacting at once, but trying to think.
Like the same user interface.
Yeah. You mean actually touching and like driving? And I haven't done that. One of my friends actually did build out a pretty cool experience, and he did scale it. His name's John Weiss, and he built out this, not Adam Weiss, and they're not related, but it was for Victoria's Secret, and it was a shopping bag. It was actually for Pink, so it was a shopping bag. It was called Design a Tote, and you could drag and drop and actually scale different objects inside of it. But you could actually have two users at the same time with multiple touch points going in there and interacting with it. So back to like that Google example, that's actually an example of someone that I know that did touch, pointer, and keyboard at the same time. But he just did that because he was a huge nerd. That wasn't a part of the requirement. And he'd be comfortable with me calling him a nerd. If there aren't any other questions, oh, I'm sorry.
What are some websites you think are role model design?
Well, one of them that people, I'll say, I'm going to say a negative thing about someone as I think about a better one. And this actually came up today because as we talk about like style guides and building out responsive sites, one of them that always gets called out is Starbucks. And the Starbucks experience, their process was cutting edge for the time, and it's really great that they did that, but it's one of the worst experiences when you look at it. It looks like a responsive site, and anything that is responsive should not look responsive. It should look perfect no matter whatever device or whatever context you may be. A really good example would be Amazon. Even though Amazon's not fully responsive, they've tested some of them, and we actually saw this earlier. So work with Ryan Stryker, and he's a UX designer, and he was showing me his header, and I'm a huge Amazon fan. And he had a completely different experience based off of than what I had. So they're definitely doing some A/B testing. But they did roll out a couple months ago that was a responsive test for a certain amount of users, and it was just a really, really awesome experience. So I imagine that that's going to come out, but they're one of the best when it comes to a personalized experience out there. And if Amazon's doing it, it has to be good. So,
Do you feel as though contextual design is making web design appear to look more simple?
Oh, no, I would say, yes. So the question was, is contextual design making things look more simple? And you can make things as complex as you want. If it's a flat, simplified, bare bones design, it's going to be a lot easier to implement, but it shouldn't prevent you from creating a really robust, beautiful, crazy experience. It's just one other factor that you would have in there. So, yeah.
I just had a question around kind of your initial approach when developing these things. Do you try to come up with something that looks good, say, on one experience like desktop, and at the same time, obviously, consider how that can break down or squish to different devices.
Mhm.
Do you start from the desktop and then kind of work your way into other devices, or do you work more from like a style guide that's generic and then feed that into all the things?
That's a really good question, and I could derail right there for a long time, but I've been starting mobile first. Certain pieces of the experience are desktop first though, so I first look at an overall module and I say, all right, where is the context where a user may use this most likely? Is it going to be in their palm? Is it going to be on their lap? Is it going to be on their desktop? So if it's going to be more of a desktop experience, like targeted to business users, I'm going to start on the desktop first and then move it down to a smaller experience. Other ones I'm going to start from small and go up big. But if you looked at one of my projects from the beginning, they're like rainbows because I use just background color red, background color blue, and I'm just moving all these little pieces apart. Last week I was working on a project and someone's like, what is that? Because it just looked like a mess of colors. So I bring in all these different pieces and I start throwing in content. And then as I'm doing that, I'm also working on a style guide and building out the smallest pieces. So it's kind of like this up-down, looking at global pieces, wireframing, sketching them out, doing concepts or prototypes in Photoshop, and getting that idea of like, this is how that brand identity can be expanded. And here it is in a toolkit, and here it is moving across the digital landscape, and then here's all the content being mixed together. So,
Can I ask a follow-up question?
yeah.
Do you do just the design, or do you also do the kind of front-end dev part of it?
I do front end, so yeah.
Okay. So when do you kind of abandon Photoshop and just start doing in code with a slice?
Once you've worked out just how the brand's going to work, so very simplified. I've been in a lot of discussions about like, oh, is Photoshop dead? And I don't think Photoshop's ever going to be dead or anything like it because myself, I could be designing fully in the browser, but a lot of those experiences where I've tried to just go straight into the browser and do it there, they're not as good as where I got inspiration and expanded the creativity in Photoshop and then moving it over to the browser and taking those pieces. And front-end developers sometimes, majority of the time, have more of a design sense or a UX sense, but it doesn't mean that they necessarily know what looks good and what doesn't look good. So that Photoshop file is still going to be needed to then build out, I guess, the rules that are based around the design. Does that answer that?
Well, where I work, they like to give the customer a clear idea of what they're going to get.
Yeah.
So they like to know about the full desktop and mobile. They don't necessarily define the in-between.
Yeah.
So, by the time it gets to me, it's very clearly defined for like both scenarios.
Yeah, and
There's a lot less experimentation, I guess.
a lot of that is like a broken piece in this whole system, and the term that I keep saying is using a PSD as a POC or a proof of concept. So anything that's in Photoshop is just purely a concept, but what's important there is identifying that to your client or the people that aren't designers, developers, making sure that they understand that what you have here isn't going to be the final product. It's just an idea or a concept to get you to that final product. And web's definitely a weird one because you're designing in a JPEG or in Photoshop, but the final deliverable isn't a JPEG. It's going to be built in HTML, which doesn't make sense, and it's going to have movement all in between. And I don't know, still Photoshop's going to be there. It's just identifying how far you take it, and really depending on the skill set or knowledge of design by the front end team. Cool. Well, if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. It's a nice transition. So thank you, everyone.